May the Lord bless your day and your week. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
It is great to be here. We have a really fascinating topic today.
We really do. So, imagine a world where painstakingly washing your dining room couch is considered this, like, matter of absolute life or death spiritual importance.
Right. Literally a matter of spiritual survival.
Yeah, but at the same time, letting your own aging parents go completely bankrupt is perfectly acceptable to God.
Which is just a wild contradiction.
It sounds insane, doesn't it? But that is exactly the bizarre historical reality we are unpacking today. We are tracking this massive ancient paradigm shift in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7.
Yes, drawing from the detailed study notes in the Holman and NAA Study Bibles.
Exactly. And the mission of this deep dive is to see how we move from a world obsessed with these rigid, external religious checklists to the messy, unfiltered reality of the human heart.
It's a huge transition.
It really is. And, if you're listening to this, you know how incredibly easy it is for any of us to fall into that trap.
Oh, totally.
Like curating our public image, making sure our external boxes are neatly checked while completely ignoring whatever might be festering on the inside.
Well, it is the ultimate human default setting, isn't it? I mean, we inherently crave these visible, measurable metrics to prove that we are good or proper.
Because checking a box is easy.
Exactly. Checking a box on an external list is a very simple transaction.
Yeah.
Doing a brutal, honest inventory of your own internal motivations. That is terrifying.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that.
Right. And what we are looking at in this specific text is the exact moment that transactional box-checking system gets completely dismantled.
Okay, so to understand how that system gets dismantled, we really have to start with a confrontation about what it actually means to be dirty.
Yes. The scene opens with a delegation of Pharisees and scribes.
And they have traveled all the way from Jerusalem to Galilee, right? Just to investigate Jesus.
Which, by the way, is a journey of about 90 miles on foot.
Wow, 90 miles.
Yeah, they aren't just casually passing through the neighborhood. This is an official, highly motivated theological audit.
They are actively looking for a reason to discredit him.
Exactly. And the violation they ultimately flag, the big issue, is that some of Jesus' disciples are eating bread with impure hands, meaning they haven't washed them before the meal.
But the historical context here is crucial because, my modern brain immediately jumps to hygiene.
Right, like washing your hands before dinner.
Yeah. It sounds like they are acting as this ancient board of health, inspecting the disciples for germs.
But hygiene wasn't even on their radar. Germ theory didn't exist. This confrontation is strictly about ritual purity.
Okay, so what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it was governed by something called the tradition of the elders. This is this massive, complex system of oral traditions that had slowly developed as a fence around the written law of Moses.
To keep people from even getting close to breaking the actual law?
Right. And by the 1st century, it had become the absolute center of rabbinic Judaism. So when these religious leaders returned from the public marketplace, they were required to perform these elaborate ritual washings.
Because the marketplace was essentially the danger zone for them, right? That's where cultures collided.
Exactly the issue. The underlying anxiety was that while buying grain or walking through the crowds, a Pharisee might have accidentally brushed against a Gentile.
Or even touched something a Gentile touched.
Yeah, like a coin that a Gentile had recently handled. In their worldview, that secondary contact made them ceremonially impure.
Like a spiritual contamination.
Exactly. So the hand washing was a highly specific physical mechanism to scrub away that cultural taint.
And it wasn't just a quick rinse under the tap, was it?
Oh, no. They would use a very precise measurement of water, sometimes literally a fistful of water poured over the hands up to the wrist, allowing it to drip off, and then reverse in the process.
Wow. And it extended far beyond just their hands. The sources point out they were washing cups, pitchers, copple pots, and as I mentioned earlier, even the couches they reclined on for meals.
It was an exhaustive list.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on the surface, they look incredibly devout.
They look extremely holy to the average person.
Yeah, they are going to exhausting lengths to maintain this extreme level of ceremonial purity. But looking at the historical reality of how this played out, it feels exactly like a modern legal loophole.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like a billionaire setting up a sketchy offshore trust fund to dodge paying taxes, but doing it in a way that his lawyers can defend as technically legal on paper.
Yeah.
So how do these religious leaders manage to justify ignoring God's actual foundational commandments while, obsessing over the purity of their water pitchers?
Well, they managed it through the psychological mechanism that plagues pretty much all legalistic systems.
Which is.
When you create an exhaustive external checklist for righteousness, it gives you a false sense of security.
Oh, I see.
If you focus all your energy on washing the pitcher correctly, you never actually have to look in the mirror. You feel justified. And Jesus actually exposes this exact hypocrisy by confronting them with a financial loophole they invented.
Right, the Corbin loophole. This is where the tension really spikes.
It does.
Jesus takes their accusation about unwashed hands and essentially counters with an accusation of elder abuse.
Yeah, he points directly to the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
Moses explicitly commanded the people to honor their father and mother.
And in the ancient Near East, that honor wasn't just about speaking respectfully, was it?
Not at all. There was no social security net, no retirement funds. Honoring your parents included a strict lifelong obligation to financially support them in their old age.
But the tradition of the elders had engineered a clever workaround.
The offshore trust fund, exactly.
Right, the religious version of it.
A person could legally declare their money, land, or assets to be korban, which is a Hebrew term meaning a gift or offering formally dedicated to God.
Okay, so once it's Corbin, what happens?
Once those assets were declared korban, they were locked away under the protection of rabbinic tradition. So an adult son could look at his destitute, aging parents and say, I'm so sorry, I cannot help you pay for food or shelter because all my wealth is now dedicated to the Lord.
But the truly insidious part of this mechanism is that they didn't actually have to hand that money over to the temple immediately.
That is the ultimate betrayal of the whole system. The tradition allowed them to keep living on that property and using those assets for themselves for the rest of their lives.
So it was just a complete legal fiction.
Entirely. They were aggressively protecting their own wealth, abandoning their vulnerable parents to starve, and wrapping the entire selfish scheme in this shiny, unassailable bow of exceptional holiness.
That is just, it's staggering arrogance.
It is. They actively invalidated the Word of God just to preserve a human tradition that kept their wallets full.
And Jesus doesn't offer a polite theological counter-argument here. He drops a hammer on them. He calls them hypocrites.
Yes, he does.
And if you look at the original Greek context of that word, it wasn't just a generic insult, was it?
No, hypocrite literally referred to a stage actor, someone playing a part behind a large theatrical mask.
So they are wearing this mask of intense religious devotion, but behind it, their hearts are actively rebelling against the actual heart of God.
Perfectly said.
So once Jesus completely exposes this fraudulent mask, he takes their literal obsession with what is going in the mouth, unwashed food, unwashed hands, and he flips the entire paradigm upside down.
He calls the crowd over to explain what actually pollutes a human being.
And he does it by delivering a remarkably blunt lesson in basic biology.
Yeah, it's a hard pivot from ceremonial law to human anatomy.
Right. Jesus explains that whatever enters a person from the outside cannot defile them spiritually because it doesn't enter the heart. It simply passes into the stomach and is eventually eliminated as biological waste.
And if you're listening to this and thinking, well, yeah, obviously eating a piece of bread with dusty hands doesn't make me an evil person, you really have to pause and realize how earth-shattering this concept was for a first-century Jewish audience.
Oh, totally. Their entire societal structure, their daily rhythms, who they could eat with, who they could do business with, it was all dictated by avoiding impure things.
Exactly. And right in the middle of Jesus explaining this biological process, the Gospel of Mark drops this parenthetical bombshell into the text.
A very brief structural earthquake.
Mark simply notes, thus, he declared all foods clean.
With one sentence, a ceremonial barrier that had stood for centuries is completely dismantled. The dietary laws that fundamentally separated Israelites from Gentiles are just gone.
Because the original historical purpose of those strict dietary laws was to instill a daily, tactile consciousness of God's holiness.
Like a teaching tool.
Exactly. A teaching tool to show that sin acts as a barrier to communion with God.
Right.
But Jesus is definitively stating that the teaching tool has served its purpose. He is establishing that true contamination has a completely different source.
Right, because food is just material. It cannot rot your soul.
No.
So if the food we eat or the dust from the Gentile marketplace isn't what makes us impure, what does? Where is the real dirt? What is the actual source of our contamination?
The contamination is entirely internal. Jesus lists the dark, unfiltered reality of what the human heart naturally produces when left to its own devices.
And it's a heavy list.
It really is. He says that from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness.
It's just a brutal, comprehensive list. And what strikes me about it is that it's not just the major headline-grabbing crimes like murder and theft.
Right, it goes deeper.
Yeah, there are some highly specific, insidious attitudes buried in that list that we constantly excuse in our modern lives.
Absolutely. For instance, the original text includes a phrase that translates literally as the evil eye.
Which sounds like a curse from a fantasy novel.
It does, but it actually refers to something incredibly common. Envy.
Oh.
It's that bitter, resentful way of looking at someone else's success, their promotion, or their possessions.
That hits a little closer to home.
Yeah.
And he also concludes the list with folly.
Yes.
We tend to use that word to describe someone being a little silly or maybe making a goofy mistake. But in this biblical context, what does folly mean?
Folly refers to a profound moral dullness. It is a complete lack of spiritual judgment, where a person becomes so callous that they can no longer distinguish between right and wrong.
Wow.
Jesus is making a devastating diagnosis here. All of these toxic realities proceed from the inside out. You cannot blame your environment. You cannot blame the people you bumped into at the market.
The source of human defilement is the human heart. So once Jesus establishes that the real dirt is internal, he immediately puts this radical new paradigm into practice by walking straight into the dirtiest place imaginable for a first-century Jewish rabbi.
He takes the lesson off the whiteboard and into the real world.
He heads right into Gentile territory.
Yes. The geography here is highly intentional. He travels about 30 miles north of Galilee into the coastal regions of Tyre and Sidon.
And this isn't just a slightly different neighborhood. This area is highly Hellenized.
Very Greek.
Right. Meaning it wasn't just geographically outside the borders of Israel. Culturally, it was completely steeped in Greek customs, pagan temples to foreign gods, Roman lifestyles, and, pork hanging in the local meat markets.
For a devout Jew, this was essentially a radioactive contamination zone.
Yet he goes there anyway.
He is likely seeking a moment of rest and strategic withdrawal from the intense, rising hostility of the religious leaders we just saw him confront. He enters a house and attempts to keep his presence a secret.
But you can't hide that kind of power. A woman tracks him down, and her identity is extremely specific. She is a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth.
This is critical because there was deep historical ethnic animosity between the Jews and the Syrophoenicians. She is the ultimate outsider to the Jewish covenants.
She is desperate because her daughter is possessed by an impure spirit. She falls at his feet and begs him to cast the demon out.
And her desperation sets the stage for one of the most jarring, uncomfortable interactions in the entire biblical narrative.
It really is.
Jesus responds to this grieving, pleading mother with a metaphor that sounds unbelievably harsh. He tells her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs."
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to stop you right there.
Sure.
Reading this in the source material made me deeply uncomfortable, and I think any listener would feel the same.
It's a tough passage.
Calling a desperate mother a dog, how do we reconcile this? It sounds incredibly cruel. It almost sounds like Jesus is adopting the exact same dismissive, arrogant attitude toward Gentiles that the Pharisees had. What is actually happening in this exchange?
This raises an important question, and it is a shocking statement. But resolving that shock requires looking at the precise language and the cultural arena he is inviting her into.
Okay, break that down for us.
In the ancient world, Jews who represent the children in this metaphor frequently used the term dogs as a severe racial slur against Gentiles. But when they used it, they were referring to the wild, dangerous scavenger dogs that roamed the street alleys.
Like dirty, feral animals.
Exactly. However, if you look at the original Greek text, Jesus does not use the word for street scavengers. He uses a very specific diminutive term. Study notes often point out this word translates to something like cachorrinos, meaning little dogs or household pets.
The little dogs. So he softens the slur, but it's still a massive test of her pride.
It is a test, but it also fundamentally changes the location of the metaphor from a dirty street alley to a family dining room.
Oh, that's a huge shift.
Right. He is stating a firm theological priority. His earthly ministry and the promises of the Messiah are directed first to the people of Israel, the children sitting at the table. But by using the imagery of the household pet, he is implying that the Gentiles are actually inside the house. They're part of the broader household of God.
Oh, wow. And her response is a masterclass in brilliant, humble faith.
It really is.
She doesn't get defensive. She doesn't demand a seat at the children's table or argue her own worthiness. She executes this perfect theological judo move.
She leans right into it.
She accepts his metaphor entirely and says, "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs."
It is stunning awareness. She completely understands who he is and the abundance of his power. She recognizes that the specific privileges of Israel do not exhaust the grace of God. She is effectively saying, I know I'm not the primary audience right now, but your grace is so immense that just a crumb dropping off the edge of your table is enough to completely restore my daughter.
And Jesus is thrilled by this. He honors that immense faith immediately. He tells her that because of her answer, the demon has left her daughter.
And she goes home, and exactly as he promised, the child is completely healed from a distance.
It's a beautiful moment of grace breaking through an ancient ethnic barrier. But Jesus isn't finished crossing boundaries. He goes from a long-distance healing of a Gentile girl to another massive, grueling geographic shift.
Yes, he leaves the coastal region of Tyre and Sidon and heads back toward the Sea of Galilee, but he takes an enormous detour right through the middle of the Decapolis.
Which is roughly a 190-kilometer journey on foot.
It's massive.
That is weeks of walking through rugged terrain. And the Decapolis wasn't Jewish territory either, was it?
Not at all. The Decapolis was a league of 10 powerful Greek cities.
Yeah.
It was another pagan stronghold, a completely Gentile region. Jesus is intentionally taking his ministry far beyond the safe, traditional borders of Judaism.
And while he is deep in this Gentile territory, the locals bring a man to him who is deaf and has a severe speech impediment. They beg Jesus to just lay his hands on him.
But Jesus doesn't do a quick, flashy, public healing.
No, he takes the man aside, completely away from the chaotic crowd, for a private moment. And what he does next is surprisingly intimate and incredibly tactile.
Very much so. He puts his fingers directly into the man's deaf ears. Then he spits, and he physically touches the man's tongue. He looks up to heaven, he sighs deeply, and he speaks an Aramaic word, ephetha, meaning be opened.
The physical mechanics of this miracle are so striking. Fingers and ears, spitting, touching a tongue. Why so much intense physical contact? Why couldn't he just speak a word like he usually does?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at how this specific man experiences the world. He cannot hear words. A verbal command would mean nothing to him until after the healing occurred. So Jesus is using a highly specific physical sign language that the man can actually feel.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Fingers in the ears communicate, I'm about to fix this. Touching the tongue communicates, I am about to release this. Even the saliva had profound context. In the ancient world, saliva was widely viewed as a curative agent.
So Jesus is meeting this isolated man exactly where he is.
Exactly. Communicating his grace in a tactile vocabulary the man perfectly understands.
But the detail that really anchors this entire scene for me is the sigh. The text emphasizes that Jesus looked up to heaven and sighed deeply.
That sigh is a window into the emotional weight of the incarnation.
What do you mean by that?
This isn't just a magician doing a trick. This is the creator of the universe, standing face to face with the physical distortion and suffering caused by the fall of humanity. It is a profound groan of sorrow over a broken world, right before he steps into the mess to restore it.
Wow. And the restoration is instantaneous. The man's ears are opened, the literal bond of his tongue is released, and he begins speaking plainly.
But immediately after this deeply personal miracle, Jesus issues a command that seems completely counterintuitive.
Right. He strictly orders the man and the crowd not to tell anyone what just happened. Which begs the question, why demand silence when you just gave a man his voice back?
This command for silence is a recurring theme in Mark's gospel, often referred to by historians as the Messianic secret. Jesus knew that if news of these spectacular miracles spread unchecked, especially back into Jewish territories, the crowds would completely misunderstand his mission.
It's almost like a movie studio desperately trying to stop a leaked out-of-context trailer from getting onto the internet.
That's a great analogy.
If the trailer makes it look like a pure action movie, the audience will show up expecting explosions. But Jesus knows. His actual mission is a deep, sacrificial rescue operation.
He didn't want the crowds projecting a military conqueror narrative onto him.
Right, expecting him to violently overthrow the Roman occupation when his actual path was heading straight toward the cross.
Exactly. He refused to let the crowds define his kingship. His true mission was to deal with that root, internal contamination of the human heart that we talked about earlier, and they couldn't possibly comprehend that until after the resurrection.
But of course, a crowd that just watched a deaf man speak isn't going to stay quiet.
No way.
The text says the more he ordered them to be silent, the more zealously they broadcasted it everywhere. They are utterly overwhelmed with astonishment, and they make this incredible sweeping declaration, "He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak."
And that phrase, "he has done all things well," is not just a casual compliment. It is a massive theological echo.
From where?
If you look at the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that phrase perfectly mirrors the language of Genesis 1:31, where God looks at the culmination of his creation and declares that it is very good.
So even if the crowd doesn't fully grasp the theology, they are unknowingly recognizing that Jesus is doing the active work of the Creator.
Yes, he is quite literally recreating broken humanity.
That is beautiful.
And the historical context reveals something else. Making the deaf hear and the mute speak is a direct, undeniable fulfillment of the ancient prophecies found in Isaiah 35, which specifically outlined the miraculous signs that would prove the Messianic age had finally arrived.
What an unbelievable journey this single chapter takes us on.
It's packed with so much.
It really is. We started in a tense standoff with religious leaders who were meticulously washing their hands with a fistful of water, desperate to avoid the messiness of the world. And we end with a savior who willingly gets his hands dirty walking miles into pagan territory, putting his fingers into deaf ears to actively heal the world.
Shattering boundaries the whole way.
Yes. He shatters the cultural barriers between Jew and Gentile. He dismantles the dietary barriers between pure and impure. And he proves that true religion isn't a flawless external mask we wear for the public. It is the messy, painful, beautiful internal transformation of the heart.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to carry into your week. Think about your own daily rhythms. What is your personal Corbin?
That's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. What comfortable traditions, routines, or even seemingly good deeds are you using right now as a mask? What external checklist are you hiding behind to avoid doing the truly difficult internal inventory of your own heart?
Because it will always be easier to aggressively scrub the outside of the water pitcher than to honestly examine the greed or the envy hiding inside. But as we've seen on this journey, the true, life-altering work of grace can only begin when we are finally willing to let the theatrical mask fall and invite healing into the deepest, most unfiltered parts of who we are.
Well said. God blesses all the listeners.